Their radio. Their radio.
Amigos, esa rolita se la dedico con todo mi corazón y sentimiento para aquellos que sueñan con algún día a México volver. Díganme con la mano arriba quién sueña con México algún día volver. Ay, mamá.
Honestly, one of the main reasons why I became interested in audio was because I grew up in a home where music plays a major role. My uncles are sonideros, and I would sometimes help them out at their gigs, setting up speakers and lights. It was one of the ways that I really got to know the different parts of LA. When I was younger, I used to get upset that they never let a song fully play without a deepened voiceover. But as I got older, I understood. Sometimes a dance floor with cumbias covered in voice acknowledgement is the closest thing some people have to home.
Porque no importa el tiempo ni la distancia. Solamente basta con soñar. Porque los sueños se vuelven ilusiones. Las ilusiones se vuelven añoranzas. Proyectos de vida. ¡Grito! Ahí está todo el mundo.
Today on the show we have Roman Zepeda, known by his artist name Turbo Sonidero. He is an East San Jose producer creating a new wave of cumbias along with his collective, Kumbia Net. I heard about Turbo Sonidero from his project Lowrider Kumbia, which are cumbias that include oldie samples. We spoke with Roman about how he found music as an escape, being inspired by DJ Shadow, patience, and bridging generations with cumbia. We began by talking about Roman's upbringing. He grew up between Mexico and San Jose.
I mean, when I went to Mexico, it was a culture shock. And then when I came back, it was a culture shock again, you know, even though, you know, I was born in San Jose and I got used to being in Mexico, you know. And I remember like feeling kind of like alienated because my English wasn't that great at the time. So I was like in ESL for a long time.
What part of Mexico did you grow up in?
Puebla.
Well, my dad's from Tepaclasco, Puebla.
I've heard of that actually. I've heard of people talk about that. But I was raised in Amozoc.
Before you got into producing cumbias, you produced hip hop beats. What inspired to get into hip hop production?
Well, I first wanted to actually be in a punk band, so I was taking guitar classes. But being in the East Side, people were not really into that back then. People were more, you know, people would be like, "Oh, why you listen to that? You're being a white boy, you know." Really into, you know, listening to rap, which I was listening to that too, but I always wanted to be in a punk band. I remember I was watching MTV late at night and DJ Shadow's music video, Midnight in a Perfect World. It was kind of like, whoa, like this is guy making music by himself. Like I had never thought about that concept, you know? And I was like, well, maybe I can make music by myself, you know? So I worked all summer, bought turntables because I was like, okay, DJ Shadow, he's working with turntables. And then I went and I bought a drum machine and a keyboard and a 4-track, and I started making beats. That's how I started making hip hop beats because, you know, I wanted to be in a band and I didn't know anybody to be in a band with. So I guess I'll make hip hop beats. And I always wanted to make music, period, you know?
Did you come from a musical family, or were you the first one to really dive into it?
I come from kind of like my family make like silversmiths, you know? We come from like 3 generations of silversmiths. So we're creative, but yeah, music wise, no. I was the only one. But to me, again, you know, there was like a form of just getting away from, you know, being in the East Side, and it was super there was a lot of gang activity, a lot of there's just the gangs. There was gangs, taggers, party crews, and like going outside was always kind of like you're going into a war zone, you know. So music for me was kind of like an escape from that.
Were you able to produce for local artists? Did you ever collaborate in that way?
I didn't actually. Again, I was also really introverted at the time. I had a one homie that was a rapper, but we really never did anything. But I remember putting a hip hop beat tape out. I would be at places and people would be like, "Oh, you're the one that made that tape," you know? Like that's how it dope, blah blah. You know, I was just in a different mindset. I was never thinking about like, oh, I could make this into something, you know? For me, music was just an escape.
There's also an interview where you mentioned that you really didn't dive into cumbias until you went on you went to visit Puebla in 2006, right? But why was that trip to Puebla pivotal for you?
Cumbia has always been in my family, and I've always liked it. Out of all of like the music that my family used to listen to, like salsa, they listen to a lot of salsa, danzones, but cumbia, I've always liked it, you know. But I think 2006, what was pivotal about that was that there was groups like Los Daddies, Los Daquino, and they were using a lot of electronics and samples. And I was like, kind of like, damn, I could do this, you know. And at the time too, you know, I was kind of like hip hop. I wasn't really listening to it that much, you know. I listened to more electronic music at the time, but yeah, I was getting bored with hip hop, and then I started getting bored with electronic music. I was always like, what if I make music that's more like for like a party or to get people together, you know? I mean, I bought a bunch of CDs on that trip to Puebla and just listening to it, and I was like, damn, I could hella produce this, you know? Cumbia Poblana has always been kind of futuristic in a way, you know, that if you listen to early Cumbia Poblana groups, they used a lot of synthesizers.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing about cumbias. When you hear it, you know where it's from, right? Puebla has a sound, Peru has a sound, and like different parts of Mexico have a sound, right? At least from what I hear is that you've tried to build is that sound from here, from California. Was that your intention to begin with?
I mean, I had no intention of ever even DJing or doing anything with music. I had gotten a MySpace account and I put the tracks up for whatever, and people started hitting me up, you know, like, oh, you should come play, or what's up with those tracks, you know. I think with any music, I think it's like connecting with whatever was made, you know, like connecting with those roots, connecting with your influences and building from that, you know. When I hear producers that are trying to sound like other producers or musicians that sound like other musicians, like cool, that's cool for them. But I think taking it to another level is always like building upon what was built and you putting your flavor into it. And that's what makes something different and original, you know?
Disco Rolas printed the Lowrider Kumbias, right? Did you begin that in 2011, or was that something that you also recently continued, the Lowrider Kumbias?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that's like a full album of mine. I would say it's like a compilation of tracks that I would make, you know? So I remember one of my homies, B-Rock from San Diego, he was like, oh, why don't you make me like a lowrider, like a cumbia with lowrider music, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then after that, I would just do it to play it at parties, you know, kind of change it up. And 10 of them were the ones that went, no, 8 of them went on the record. But yeah, I would play it at parties, and sometimes, you know what? There was a couple people that would be like, why are you playing that? You shouldn't be playing that. That takes our culture back. Because back in the days, you know, it's like you're right now, like all the like cholo culture is like in, you know? It's like popular, you know, you got Fools Gone Wild and all that. But back then, like people like hella looked down upon it. Yeah, people would be like, oh, that's like taking our culture back. Like we're trying to get away from like, you know, gang culture or cholo culture. But I was like, dude, that's what, you know, I grew up with, you know? And I think I always wanted to put them all out. But again, I didn't think it was the right time back then. And sometimes, you know, waiting is key when it comes to music, especially if people don't understand what you're doing at the time.
At least the way I look at it, it's kind of like also bringing like two generations together, right? Because it's like the lowrider and the oldies, and it's more like of a older Mexican generation that's been here for a while in the U.S. But when I think of sonideros, I think of mostly like first generation. At least for me personally, my uncles are most of them are sonideros. So I also appreciate it because it kind of bridges those two generations.
Even cumbia, when I was making it, like when I first was making it, people were like, "Oh, this is like goofy or weird," or like what, why are you making cumbia? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Or they look at me and they're just like, "Oh, you're not, into cumbia." They think I'm into something else, so I don't know. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, people think it's like paisa, be like, "Oh, that's like," and I'm just like, nah. To me, it's like the dopest music in the world.
You dance, yeah, no, and it's danceable and it's global. It's global. It's one of those global things. Once I saw you post that you'll be traveling like around different countries, I'm like, damn, like cumbia is really like out there in Europe too. Yeah, how's that different?
15 years ago, there was CISEC, and CISEC was a lot of Argentinian producers, and they were dope. They were doing like more like electronic with cumbia, but I think that wave has kind of died out, and going back to Europe and playing like sonidero hits, like people go crazy. Like my friends they'll play first and they'll play like CISEC type beats, and the crowd is kind of like, yeah, they're liking it, but once you put like the sonidero, just like the bass and everything, like people just go crazy. Not a lot of people are playing that type of music. So when we go out there, most parties are super packed. The crowds will be like from like 300 to 700 people. People are going wild.
The one you mentioned, was that the person that produced the Oye Mujer one?
No, CISEC is like, there's a label from Argentina,
Got it.
mid like 2005, 2006.
Mm-hmm.
I remember listening to it and I was like, that's cool, but I always wanted to do the sonidero stuff. So at the beginning, I was trying to do more like electronic cumbias, which, there's something that we say, like a lot of Europe, the first European, like European, or just any type of producer, even Mexican cumbia producer that wasn't like traditional, like sonidero, I felt like they were always trying to do electronic music with cumbia. As far as like me and Kumbia Net is doing cumbia music with electronics. So it's like, it's different, like it's like they're doing house music and they put a cumbia sample, and we're not as different for us. We're doing cumbia music with house music, freaking aesthetics.
I know you had also mentioned that you went to Puebla. You lived in Puebla for a few years, right? In 2010?
Yeah, I did. I was out there for a couple years. For certain type of music, you have to go to the area where it's being made at, to feel it. It's kind of like I came with this idea because I would listen to like rappers from the UK or like rappers from Europe and trying to make like American rap. Like it doesn't sound right. There's like something missing. It just doesn't have the flavor. And I felt my early tracks didn't have that flavor, that sonidero flavor. So I wanted to go to Mexico and like go to sonideros, learn how to dance, go feel that flavor, go see how it is. My music changed definitely after that trip. I got an understanding of how to make a sonidero track, but add my flavor. From San Jose.
I also wanted to ask you something about, like, I think inclusivity, because it's one of those things I feel like where when there's a sonidero event, there's also very like it seems very inclusive, right? But from your experience, has it been inclusive, especially because we see a lot of like same gender dances and also like people from like different backgrounds.
It's super inclusive, man. I always feel like Mexicans always get kind of singled out as being kind of like macho or homophobic, which there is that, of course. There is that in Mexican society. But in a sonidero, like all that's like out the door. Like everybody dances with everybody. Like, oh, you're trans or you're this or that. If you're a dope dancer, like you're a dope dancer. My mom used to go to sonideros when she was young in Mexico City. And she used to talk about how like there, like you could be like a murderer, you could be somebody that steals shit, delincuente, you could be whatever, like nobody cares, like once you get to the dance floor, you're included, and it's kind of like all the marginalized people, everybody that isn't wanted in regular Mexican society, whether you're trans, gay, where, Mexican society is really conservative. But in the sonidero, no, it's like everybody's accepted, you know.
Yeah, and that's where it came from, right? It came from the hoods of Mexico, right? The music and that culture. So
Yeah, it comes from straight up hood, you know. So it's like you're already, you know, you're broke, you don't have money, so you're not tripping like, oh, are you gay? Are you trans? Are you this or that? You know, like no, you come in, we're all gonna party together because life sucks as it is. You know?
yeah. I want to know more about Kumbia Net. So I know earlier I had read it was like a collective, but I know there's also like a documentary portion to it recently. So what exactly is Kumbia Net?
So Kumbia Net started off as Cumbia Oscura. It's a collective of producers and DJs. We're all interested in and doing, you know, cumbia with electronic, you know, music, you know, aesthetics, and using aesthetics that it's like kind of like, so some like doing like rave music, other producers like doing like trap music, or hip hop. There are a lot of the producers I've known them for over like 5 years, some even 10 years. I just remember chatting with them and having conversations and being like, well, we don't have any space to make our music, you know, like where do we put it up? Like, yeah, you put it up on SoundCloud, but then people forget about it or people don't hear about it, you know? And everybody's in different parts of Mexico, and I'm in the United States. So I was just like, why don't we just like form a crew? Just put it out there, you know, we could use each other's network and our music out there. But originally there was another crew that we were all in called Cumbiamberos Internacionales. And Cumbiamberos Internacionales first started in Argentina to promote cumbia ditada. And cumbia ditada is a style of cumbia from San Luis Potosí. That's really sample based. I don't know. It's kind of aggressive. It's fast. It's like fast tempo. It could be slow too, but yeah, cumbia ditada. I love cumbia ditada. I use that type of style in my cumbias. But we all came from that crew, you know, and then that crew kind of disbanded because right now cumbia ditada is like they play it everywhere. Now they play it like in Puebla, you know. So a lot of the producers were getting like, we're like, well, I just work with this sonido, and he told me like I can't work with anybody else. So people started falling out of the crew. So kind of like the crew just disbanded, you know, because they couldn't produce like tracks for other outlets. It had to be for just that one sonido. The ones that were left and the more experimental producers like Sefixer, Ato, Plastic Toy Sound, we were kind of like, well, what do we do now? You know, Cumbiamberos Internacionales is dead. Let's do Kumbia Net, you know?
And then the sample cumbias, was it kind of like what you were also doing earlier, where you were like sampling like hip hop into the cumbia?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the lowrider cumbias is like cumbia ditada, but my style. But cumbia ditada now it's known as huepa,
I know that you're also part of the grupo Jejeje, and that's with.
valero.
How did y'all become connected? Was it through the traveling that you made, or was it through the internet?
Most of the internet, he found me on SoundCloud and he hit me up and he was like, check out my tracks. And I listened to him. I thought he was from Mexico at first. And I was like, damn, this is dope. You know, I really like what he was doing. But then it turns out he went to Mexico for like a year or two in some exchange program, working at a school. And he listened to cumbia. He liked it, went back to the UK, and he started making cumbia tracks. But he's also Iranian, you know, Persian. So I think like a lot of the melodies and stuff that he uses are really Persian kind of influence, you know, like he puts that flavor into his music, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I listened to his stuff, and at the time, this was like around 2013. And I was like, damn, this is really cool, you know, because a lot of producers at the time weren't really doing sonidero stuff. It was like more like the C-Sec stuff that I was talking to you about, where it's like electronic cumbia or whatever. So I was like, damn, this is dope. Like I would love to work with you. Yeah, we worked on our tracks till like 2018 on the internet, you know. And I remember he was always like, let's just put it all out, you know, let's put it on SoundCloud. But I was always like, nah, let's like wait, you know. Like again, you know, like sometimes, you know, being patient is key until somebody really took interest in putting it on vinyl, and that was Discos Rodas.
How did you come to that realization then, when knowing the right timing is for certain music?
Like at I don't know, I just saw it, you know. I knew Sonidero was going to be the next thing, you know. Just seeing how people would react, like a lot of electronic like producers would be into our music, would hit us up as Grupo Eje and be like, damn, we kind of like what you do. These were like forward thinking like type of producers, like Nafi, for example. But Nafi is like an experimental electronic music crew from Mexico City. And then there was a lot of like producers from Europe, and they would always be like, damn, this is really dope, you know? That's one thing. If like trendsetters are like hitting you up and being like, they like your stuff. I mean, just knowing how music goes, that's gonna be next, you know? Whatever trendsetters are listening to, that's what's gonna be like the future of music, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a gamble, maybe not, maybe, but you know, I took it like waiting. Discos Rolas were interested, and we put it on vinyl, and it was, you know, like that record right now costs over $100. That's kind of rare for records, like a brand new record to go up in price like that, you know?
Especially because you also have the remix by Sonido Dueñas, right? Well, the originator, right, of Cumbia Rebajada.
Yeah.
But how was that? How did that connection come to be?
You know what? Working with Dueñas came about because I have a really good friend that lives in Monterrey. He's from originally from San Jose, and he moved to Monterrey like 10 years ago. He's been in the cumbia scene out in Monterrey. So he was like, dude, I've been working with Dueñas. Like, you guys should bring him out to the United States, you know? And I was kind of like, damn. So we had the Grupo Eje, the record release party, and I was like, we should invite him for that out in LA. Yeah, we made it happen. You know, we picked him up out in Tijuana, which that was a journey in itself. You know, picking him up, trying to like bring in his records, because he doesn't have a musician visa, like an artist visa, you know. So he just has a regular visa. And artists like that, I mean, artists that don't have artist visas and coming to the United States to play, it's like a gamble, because if they get caught, you know, they get their visa like revoked, you know. So we had to cross into Tijuana and bring those records in a different car. And we took him in a different car, and it was just like, you know, a bunch of things happened. So we got a flat tire, and there was all this crazy stuff that happened in between. But yeah, it was a mission. And then the idea came up of like making the record in Rebajado, you know? Which the record, I think, like if you listen to the original Kumbia and the Rebajado, it's like a different record almost, you know?
Which kind of reminds me of the time that I think my dad was telling me that back in earlier in the 2000s. I think they also tried to bring a sonidero here in LA, but he came to LA and then they shut it down, like because it got super packed, right? Because it was like it like overfilled, and I think it became a whole thing.
La Changa.
La Changa, yeah. I heard something else. My bad.
Yeah, he was playing, and they found out that he didn't have an artist visa. They closed. And there was like thousands of people, and right before he was about to play, they like fucking immigration came through and was like, "You ain't playing." Like,
Yeah. And then there's something you mentioned, like with having Sonido Dueñas, was also with like sticking to the roots of many of the things, right?
That's always been important, you know, for me, you know, like always like, you know, paying homage to the people that came before me, and even like trying to include them, working with them, you know, which it could be hard sometimes. Sometimes they're like, what, like, I don't get what you're doing, or I don't, whatever, you know. In the beginning, it was pretty. I mean, and I understand it, you know. Sonideros, that's their livelihood. They're making money off of it, off of whatever they're doing. So for me to be like, oh, like, I'm Turbo Sonidero, like, could we make an album or something like that? They're kind of like, well, I don't know who you are. I don't, you know, I'm over here trying to work and do this and that. That like they don't really see like what it could be, you know. I think now things are changing in that way. Now there's sonidos that are recognizing what we're doing, especially as Kumbia Net, you know. A lot of the lowrider oldies have been played in sonidos. by Traditional Sonideros, Amantes del Futuro, which is another member of Kumbia Net. He's had a track that's super popular right now, and the Sonideros, you know. And there's actually other poblano groups doing remakes of that track, which is it's wild, you know. And the same thing with Orihuela. Orihuela is a producer from Puebla, and his music gets played in sonideros now, you know. You know, cumbia ditada or huepa right now, that gets played at all the sonidos, like that will only last so long, you know. People are gonna try to be like, what's next, you know? And I think what we're doing with Kumbia Net, I think that's next.
There is a question I wanted to bring up again of cumbias in the U.S. The way it was perceived, right? You've been doing it for a while. When did you feel like there's more appreciation for cumbias and for sonideros, at least here in the U.S.?
I think for what we're doing, I think in the last like 4 years, yeah, a lot of youngsters, you know, like teenagers hitting me up and being like, I'm really into what you're doing, you know, because again, like I remember when I first started. There was a lot of cumbia bands. They kind of didn't like what I was doing, you know, because they were like, well, you know, we're a band and you're just a producer and just whatever, you know. But yeah, it's I think in the last 4 years, especially in the last 2 years with that movie Ya No Estoy Aquí, now there's a lot of kids that are just younger generations that are really into it, and it's dope. There's been a bigger appreciation for Latino music, or Mexican, or whatever you want to call it, you know, Latinx music. You know what? When I first started, like back in like 2008, 2009, I remember like people would be like, when you would go to like an alternative, like Mexican type of, I guess of what we would call Latinx right now. It would only be rock en español, rap en tu idioma, and that's all it was, you know. And I would be like, well, there's other music coming out of Mexico that's not just rap and rock en español. It's just not just Caifanes and Maná, you know. There's more to alternative, you know, Mexican music. Sometimes they would invite me to play, but they would always give me like the wackest slots. You know, they would be like, I would be playing and there would be like a band practicing while I'm playing, and I'm like, damn. So then from there, like I remember starting a crew called Sonido Clash, and Sonido Clash, it was a crew that we wanted to show that there was other Latino music, alternative Latino music. It wasn't just rock en español or rap en tu idioma, you know? And now I see like festivals like out in Chicago, Ruido Fest. What was the festival that they had in LA? I forgot. But it was just this was out in LA. It was Latinx artists, you know, like Chicano Batman and you know, Cuco, artists like that, you know. Mm-hmm. And right now there's an appreciation for that. There's like a scene, there's a space where, you know, 10 years ago there wasn't that, you know. It was just rock en español y rap en tu idioma, and that was that.
But what was it for you that got you into that appreciation for cumbia?
Just going to sonideros in Mexico was exciting, and then learning more about cumbia culture. Yeah, to me, cumbia is everything that I always wanted, like rap to be or punk to be. You know, I feel like also like hip hop and rap. I always tell this to my homies, you know, that are doing hip hop, that like it's like after you're like 20, like in your late 20s, and you're still doing hip hop, and you haven't made it anywhere. Like, dude, just call it quits, man. It's like you kind of look like you're trying to rap and you're like in your 30s, like what are you gonna rap about that, you know, how are you gonna connect with the younger generation? Like, they don't care what you gotta say, you know. It's not multi-generational. Cumbia for me is multi-generational. You could be old, young, doing cumbia and still be respected and getting listened to by different generations.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You can follow Turbo Sonidero on Instagram and listen on Spotify and on Bandcamp at turbosonidero.bandcamp.com.